The Hardy Boys and the Missing Chums. Chapter 7. Wreckage. "Good night. We'll be lucky if we get away on the trip at all," exclaimed Frank as he and Joe hastened down the stairs. Mrs. Hardy had already gone to the front door to welcome Aunt Gertrude, who was speaking of the wickedness of taxi drivers in general. "So," she ejaculated, as the boys appeared, "standing up at a front window laughing at your great aunt instead of coming down and helping carry up her bags like little gentlemen. I'm surprised at you." "We were just getting dressed, Aunt Gertrude," explained Frank meekly. "Getting dressed, huh?" snorted Aunt Gertrude, taking in their attire. "Getting dressed? What kind of an outfit do you call that?" She poked Joe in the ribs with her umbrella, indicating the faded khaki shirt he was wearing. "Speak up, boy. What kind of an outfit is that? No necktie, holes in your trousers, shoes not shined." "We were just getting ready to go on a boat trip, Aunt Gertrude," Joe explained. "Boat trip? Boat trip? No!" "That settles it," declared Aunt Gertrude, coming into the house and banging the umbrella decisively on the floor by way of emphasis. "I shan't allow it." "The very idea, Laura," she said, turning to Mrs. Hardy. "I'm surprised at you, absolutely astonished. The very idea of letting these children go out in a boat. Don't you remember what happened to my cousin Peter? He went out in a boat, didn't he? And what happened? The boat upset. He might have been drowned if the water had been deep enough. Thank goodness he was only a few feet from the shore. Or think what could have happened. But it only goes to show what can happen. If these boys go out in a boat, they'll be drowned. I can't permit them to be drowned. They shan't go on any boat trip. That settles it." She strode into the living room. "Boys, bring in my bags," she commanded. Mrs. Hardy smiled, for she was quite accustomed to the eccentricities of Aunt Gertrude, and the Hardy boys scuttled down the front steps for the bags. "Do you think she means it?" whispered Joe. "Sure, she means it. But we'll go out somehow. She'll rave for a while, but she'll forget all about it, and then we can start out." The boys deposited Aunt Gertrude's luggage in the guest room, and then went downstairs for the inspection. By this time the old lady had taken off her coat and hat and was seated in the most comfortable chair, fanning herself with a newspaper. "Boat trip," she was snorting as they entered the room. "Never heard of such a thing. Letting little boys like you go out on a boat alone? If they were my boys, I wouldn't let them out of my sight. Up to some mischief, I'll be bound." "They are going out to look for two chums of theirs who have been lost for 3 days," Mrs. Hardy explained. "And serves them right. I suppose they were out on a boat trip, too. I knew it. And now they're lost. That's what happens when you let children go out in boats. They get lost or drowned, and now they would let these 2 youngsters go out in a boat, too. I suppose in a few days some of their chums would have to go out in a boat to look for them. They'd get lost, too, and then some more little boys would go out to look for them, and they'd get lost. By the end of the summer there wouldn't be a boy left in Bayport." "Not that it would be much of a loss," sniffed Aunt Gertrude, "but I hate to see people making fools of themselves." "Did you have a pleasant journey?" asked Mrs. Hardy, anxious to change the subject. "Did I ever have a pleasant journey?" countered Aunt Gertrude. "What with the rudeness of conductors and ticket sellers and baggagemen and taxi drivers, there's no enjoyment in traveling nowadays. But I put 'em in their place. I know my rights, and I insist on them." She glanced ferociously about the room as though confronting a multitude of conductors, baggagemen, and taxi drivers awaiting judgment. "Now, boys, what are you staring at? Don't you know it's rude to be staring at people? Run away and play. I want to talk to your mother. Run away and play. Shoo!" She brandished the umbrella at them, and the Hardy boys left the room. Their mother excused herself for a moment and followed them into the hall. "Run," she said, smiling. "I'll take care of Aunt Gertrude. Run along while you have the chance." They kissed their mother good-bye and hastily departed, wondering how she was to explain their flight to the terrible Aunt Gertrude, in view of the lady's melancholy predictions concerning their fate should they venture out into a boat. They found Slim Robinson awaiting for them at the boat-house, and with many chuckles the boys told him of their escape from the tyrant who would have prevented their departure. "We'd better hurry or she'll be down here after us if she finds we've got away from her," declared Joe. "Tony and the other fellows are over in the other boathouse," Slim told them. "I think they're ready now." "All right, let's be going." Frank started the engine of the sleuth, and the motorboat moved slowly out into the open bay. He steered a course for the entrance to Prito's boathouse, where Tony and the others were waiting. As soon as Tony saw him, he started his own craft, and the Napoli nosed its way out abreast of them. "All set," shouted Frank. "All set. Away we go." The two boats drummed their way out into Bearmont Bay and headed out towards the sea, side by side, picking up speed when they had threaded their way through the shipping near the docks. It was evening before they reached the first village on the coast. After leaving the bay, and although they made numerous inquiries, they failed to find any trace of their chums. No one in the village had seen or heard a motorboat during the storm, although they readily admitted that the craft might have passed without being noticed, owing to the gloom and the violence of the gale. The chums spent the night at this village and resumed their journey the next morning, going further up the coast. Their progress was necessarily slow because there were numerous small villages, and they stopped at them all to make inquiries. But in every case the answer was the same. No motorboat answering to the description of the envoy had been seen. None of the fishermen had heard of the craft. "It's 10 chances to 1 that there was a wreck in that storm," an old fisherman at one of the villages declared when they told him their story. "Unless they were mighty lucky, they wouldn't get past Ragged Reef. They might get this far up the coast, but they'd never get past the reef." "Where is that?" "Not far from here, up past the next point. Seems to me I heard one of the boys sayin' this morning that there was some wreckage on the reef yesterday. There's none of our boats missin' from hereabouts, so maybe it's them young fellers." The two motorboats whereupon started for Ragged Reef. The lads were downhearted. They had little hope that they would ever find their two companions alive. The words of the old fisherman struck terror into their hearts. When they rounded the point, they saw the black and ominous line of Ragged Reef before them, a jagged and irregular series of rocks jutting about the surface of the water in the form of a huge semicircle. This was the reef on which the envoy might have come to grief. Fortunately, the day was calm, so that the searchers were able to venture more closely to the reef than they might have otherwise dared. Frank edged the sleuth in towards the rock as closely as possible. Suddenly he gave an exclamation. "The fisherman was right. There is wreckage there." He pointed to a few broken fragments of wood that could be discerned against the rocks. Joe picked up the marine glasses and peered at the fragments for some time. "It's wreckage of a boat of some kind," he declared gravely, lowering the glass at last. "But whether it's from the envoy or not, I couldn't say." Slim also looked through the glasses. He was able to see more fragments of the wreckage farther along the reef. "Some boat has been battered to pieces along here. There isn't enough wreckage left to tell whether it was a motorboat or a sailing vessel." He scrutinized the mainland. "Nothing there," he announced finally. "Not a sign of life, nor wreckage either. It's all on the reef." So interested had the boys been in the fragments of broken wood on the jagged rocks that they had not noticed that the motorboat was edging closer to the reef. There was a strong current at that point, and unnoticed by the boys, the boat was being carried irresistibly forward. The warning shout from the lads in the Napoli told them of their danger. Frank had throttled down the engine so that the sleuth had been almost drifting. Now he sprang for the helm, conscious of the peril that had crept so insidiously upon them. The great black rocks of the reef loomed closer. The motorboat seemed to be dragged mercilessly towards its doom. The powerful current had the craft firmly in its grasp. Chapter 8. The Strange Letter. The engine roared as Frank Hardy opened the throttle and bore down on the helm of the sleuth. The grip of the current about the reef was so strong that for a moment it seemed that the motorboat could not fight against it. Then slowly the craft swung about, seemed to remain motionless for a moment, and then began to forge ahead, away from the reef. Fighting against the force of the current, the motorboat made slow progress. Still, it was gaining ground. The boys waited tensely as the craft struggled out of danger. Gradually the sleuth drew away from the reef. Gradually the grip of the current relaxed, and Frank cautiously nosed the boat over to the left and managed to get out of the current altogether. The whole affair had occurred in a few seconds, but it had seemed an eternity to the boys in the boat and their chums in the other craft. It would only have been a matter of moments before they might have been swept swiftly down on to the treacherous reef. "That'll teach me to watch where I'm going," said Frank, as he sat back and mopped his brow. "There was mighty near a lot more wreckage on that reef," remarked Slim soberly. "The boat wouldn't have lasted long if we'd piled up on that rock." "I'll say it wouldn't. I think we'd better get away from here. We'll never be able to get close enough to identify that wreckage. Might as well go on up the coast." They drew up alongside the Napoli, and after discussing the narrow escape they had just had from being cast upon the reef, acquainted the other boys with their decision to continue the search. "There's no use trying to get closer to that wreckage," declared Frank. "It's all in small pieces by now, and we probably wouldn't be able to say whether it was from the envoy or not, if we did reach it. We may as well go on up the coast and keep making inquiries at the other villages." This plan was followed, but to no avail. Their inquiries were fruitless. The envoy, with Chet and Biff, seemed to have vanished into thin air. At none of the fishing villages were they able to find anyone who had seen or heard of the missing motorboat. As for the wreckage on the reef, no one was found who could enlighten them. 2 or 3 fishing boats had been wrecked during the storm, but they had met their fate further up the coast, and in each case the scene of the wreckage was known to the fishermen. "It might have been your friend's boat, and it might have been only some old wreckage washed down the coast by the storm," said one keen-eyed salt. "You'd best give up the search. If they're drowned, they're drowned, and that's all there is to it. If they were wrecked and managed to save themselves, they'll make their way to the nearest village, and they'll get home from there without any trouble. If you haven't found any trace of them by now, there isn't much use going on any further, for they would never have got this far up the coast without having been seen by some of the fishermen." The boys reluctantly agreed that his advice was sound. They turned back for Bayport. Then they returned to the city and reported that their quest had been unsuccessful. They were scarcely prepared for the sensation that the news aroused. The Hoopers were frantic with anxiety as their last hopes were dashed. The Mortons were almost stunned. They had hoped against hope that the search would bring them at least some news of the missing boys. The local papers featured the story, and the city was aroused. In every village and town along the coast to the north and the south, people were discussing the mysterious disappearance of the motorboat and its human freight. Fishermen were on the lookout for any trace of the craft. The Coast Guards promised to do all in their power to clear up the mystery, but when 3 days more went by and there was still not the slightest solution in sight, the opinion became general that the boat had been wrecked in the storm and had gone to the bottom. The 2 boys were given up for lost. The Hardy boys and their chums were gradually forced to the belief that Chet and Biff had perished. Then came an incident that temporarily drove the tragic affair from the minds of Frank and Joe because it concerned their own home more intimately. Aunt Gertrude had greeted them on their return with a barrage of scathing comments on their disobedience and leaving on the trip in spite of her avowed disapproval, and she expressed the greatest amazement because they had returned alive after all. "You may thank Providence that you got back," she declared in her most sarcastic fashion. "It was through no skill of your own, I'll be bound. Your poor mother and me were worried to death all the time you were away, gallivanting over the ocean." And Gertrude did not add that Mrs. Hardy's worries had been chiefly occasioned by the aunt's dire predictions of the certain death that awaited the boys on the search. However, her tone was modified somewhat when she realized that they had indeed been hunting for the missing Chums, and she made it her business to call on the Hoopers and the Mortons to condole with them, for she was a good-hearted soul in her own way, although it is to be feared that her condolences did more to add to the certainty that the boys were drowned than they served to cheer up the sorrowing parents. The third day after the Hardy boys returned, she was sorting over the morning mail, having duly taken charge of every department of the household. "Ha!" she exclaimed, holding a letter up to the light. "Here's a letter addressed to Fenton Hardy. Bad news in it, I'll be bound." Aunt Gertrude could smell bad news a mile away, Frank often said. "Bad news in it, I can tell. I dreamt about haystacks last night. Haystacks! Whenever I dream about haystacks, it means bad news. I never knew it to fail. Open the letter, Laura." "But it isn't addressed to me," objected Mrs. Hardy. "Fiddlesticks! It's addressed to your husband, isn't it? You have as much right to open it as he has, more. It's a wife's duty to help her husband as much as she can and look after his affairs for him. Man and wife are one, aren't they? Open the letter." Mrs. Hardy, with some misgivings, slit open the envelope, and Aunt Gertrude, who was possessed of an insatiable curiosity, immediately seized the letter. "I'll read it for you," she offered. "Fenton Hardy, Bayport," she began. "Dear Sir, we wish to inform you that we have—" "My goodness! What's this? What's this, gracious me?" She lapsed into unintelligible mutterings as she read the rest of the letter to herself, frequently giving vent to exclamations of surprise while her eyes widened with astonishment. Mrs. Hardy and the boys could hardly contain their impatience until at last Aunt Gertrude laid down the letter and peered triumphantly at them over her spectacles. "Didn't I say so?" she demanded stridently. "Didn't I say there was bad news in this letter? Didn't I tell you I dreamed of haystacks last night? Haystacks always mean bad news." She looked at the letter again. "Although for the life of me I can't imagine what the man means. Kidnapped." She looked up suddenly at the Hardy boys and glared at them. "You boys haven't been kidnapped lately? No? Of course not. What nonsense. Has anyone tried to kidnap you?" "No, Aunt Gertrude," said Frank, utterly mystified. "Then," demanded Aunt Gertrude, pushing the letter across to Mrs. Hardy and folding her arms as though prepared to wait until doomsday for a satisfactory answer, "what does this letter mean?" Mrs. Hardy picked up the letter and read it aloud, while an expression of amazement crossed her face. "Fenton Hardy, Bayport," ran the letter. "Dear Sir, we wish to inform you that we are holding your 2 sons in a safe place, and that we will not return them to you unless you agree to the following conditions. You must pay us the sum of $5,000 as ransom. You must agree to refuse to give evidence in the Asbury Park bank robbery case, and you must further agree to give up your pursuit of our leader, Baldy Turk. These are our conditions. It will do you no good to attempt to find your sons, for we will not hesitate to put them out of the way if you attempt to discover our hiding place. Furthermore, until you agree to what we ask, it will go hard with you. You may signify your agreement to the terms of this letter by dropping a package containing the money and a signed statement to the effect that you will drop your pursuit of Baldy Turk and that you will not give evidence against our associates in the robbery case. From the 5:15 express from the Bayport next Thursday afternoon, as it passes the grade crossing at the North Road. The letter was unsigned. What on earth does it mean? Said Mrs. Hearty. Frank and Joe looked at one another in astonishment. Frank reached over for the letter and examined it. The strange document was typewritten on an ordinary quality of white paper. The envelope bore the Bayport postmark, indicating that it had been posted from the city post office early that morning. It must be a practical joke of some kind, said Mrs. Hearty in perplexity. Practical joke? Nothing, scoffed Aunt Gertrude shrewdly. Did Fenton Hardy go to Chicago after some criminal? He went to arrest Baldy Turk, replied Frank. There! Aunt Gertrude pounded the table. That explains the whole thing. The companions of this Baldy person sent that letter in the hopes that it would bring Fenton Hardy back from Chicago by the next train. But the letter is addressed to Bayport. Certainly. Why not? They wouldn't know where to reach him in Chicago. So they sent the letter here and trusted that it would be forwarded to him. And if I hadn't been here, said Aunt Gertrude, it very probably would have been forwarded to him. Am I right? I usually forward his personal mail, admitted Mrs. Hearty. There! Didn't I know it? And look what would have happened. Fenton Hardy would have fallen right into the trap. He would have come back home, thinking his precious sons were kidnapped, and that would have given this Turk person time to get away. It's a blessing I was here, I tell you. I hope this will be a lesson to you, Laura Hardy. Always open your husband's mail. Always.